Hollyweird Science Panel for San Diego Comic-Con 2021. I am Jenna Busch. I'm a writer for Vital Thrills and Sci-Fi Wire, contributor to 11 of the 12 Psych Geeks book series. And I am going to have the panel introduce themselves, starting with Stephen.
Hi, my name is Stephen Cass. I am a science and technology journalist. I've written for people like Popular Science, Discover, MIT Technology Review, Nautilus. Currently, I'm a senior editor of the best magazine you've never heard of. It's called IEEE Spectrum, but our website is free, so please check it out. And I am the co-author with Kevin of the first two Hollyweird Science books. And Kevin, I think, can tell you a little bit more about those and about himself.
Well, let's move on to Kevin.
I'm Dr. Kevin Grazier, trained as a planetary dynamicist. I spent 15 years on the Cassini mission to Saturn and Titan. I have been the science advisor on several TV series and films, series most notably Battlestar Galactica and Eureka, films most notably Gravity and the latest Pirates of the Caribbean film. Upcoming, have Persephone, and I'm also co-author of the first two Hollywood science books.
Jessica?
Hi, my name is Jessica Cail. I am a Ph.D. Professor of psychopharmacology and research, brain scientist. I'm a brain scientist. I consult on a bunch of shows, a lot of Marvel. I used to work with the military on super soldier stuff, so I get a lot of the Marvel, how do we turn captain into captain or something like that. And I am co-authoring the third book and possibly the fourth, I don't know, they're getting longer and longer, in the ever increasingly misnamed trilogy of the Hitchhiker's Guide, I'm stuck on that, of the Hollyweird science books.
Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley Miller. I'm a screenwriter and television writer. I wrote Thor, X-Men First Class. In TV, I worked on Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which is the most difficult to pronounce Terminator title of all time. Let's see, I worked on Fringe, and most recently I created and executive producer on the Netflix original anime, Dota Dragon's Blood, which has nothing to do with science fiction, except for the three-body problem is really, really freaking important. Spoiler alert.
And Lisa?
Hi. I'm Lisa Klink. I'm a television writer. I've worked on a lot of sci-fi shows like Star Trek Voyager, Roswell, most recently Pandora. And I am not nearly as smart in real life as any of these people, but I can sure technobabble.
Okay, so I'm going to read the description of this panel because we're going to jump into a question about it. And I did not write this. It is written better than I could. So, the pantheon of science fiction and science-themed film and television is filled with examples of where storytellers deliberately choose inaccurate descriptions of science to craft celebrated productions. While these types of choices are always guaranteed to garner internet outrage, our panel of Hollywood writers and science consultants are here to discuss examples where the accurate description of science is not only unnecessary, sometimes it is undesirable. So I want to throw the first question out to everybody. To what degree do you agree with the basic premise of this panel? And anyone can start.
Science sucks.
Science is fair. No, I that's absolutely right. Like, science is great, but it's a means to an end. Like, the reality is, like, do you actually like watching science fiction, or do you just want to watch documentaries? And that's actually a legitimate choice. But if you're going to watch science fiction, which can explore very real ideas and is a very useful tool for that, and has inspired generations of science and engineers, and is very useful when talking about real science and technology, nonetheless, you're there for plot and characters and story, and everything else is secondary to that.
Ashley, I know you have an opinion on this. You have an opinion on everything.
I have many opinions. Look, I think where the adherence to science is valuable is that it creates rules, right? Rules create boundaries. Boundaries are good for drama because those boundaries generate obstacles which force choices for characters. Where it becomes a pain in the ass or it becomes difficult is when the adherence is so tight that you can't really move anymore, right? Like, and I'll give you an example. It's like we like to think of, pick your favorite flavor of Star Trek. by the definitions that we're talking about is Star Trek science fiction. No, it's just not. Everything from the way that beam weapons work over the distances that we're telling each other they're supposed to work, to the idea of projected shields that can absorb energy, to warp drive, to almost any of that crap. We can sit here and we can think of ways perhaps around a lot of this stuff, but it wouldn't actually resemble what happens in Star Trek, right? We can only talk about it in the context of, here's something maybe you can do that sort of feels like that. What Star Trek got right were cell phones and iPads. And Majel Barrett Roddenberry will also be a voice, for your phone if you really, really wanted to. But other than that, it's pretty far off. But why do we even but it's not like we reject out of hand the idea that Star Trek is science fiction. We don't, right? We accept it as science fiction because it's telling, it very often tells great stories about the value of science, right? And that to me is the bright line.
As long as it's plausible-ish.
Right, exactly.
Well, I think the really important thing is to stay consistent with the rules of your own universe. Star Trek has set up a universe in which warp drive exists and transporters exist and things like that. And so as long as you stay consistent with those rules, you can't beam while you're at warp, and the shields will go down if you hit them too hard, and holograms exist and things like that. Really, self-consistency, I think, is in the sci-fi world maybe even more important than being true to the actual science.
And we have about 30 hours of interviews with various writers, producers, and one person, Narain Shankar, who got a start as science advisor on Star Trek. He told us that the science advisor on Star Trek isn't about adherence to the laws of this universe. It's about the consistency of made up stuff.
Yep.
And basically the same thing you said. It's about the sticking to the laws of your universe. And one thing that's important is science fiction is almost by definition a genre that has at least one fundamental inaccuracy. The bargain is that go with me on this one really fantastic idea, and we'll do our best to be accurate in everything else. Is sort of the way, that's a way to ground your story, to do sort of fantastic things. A good example is we did this in Defiance. We had a really extreme world. We had a lot of fantastic situations. So every opportunity we had to ground our world in science, we did it. So the audience is more likely to make that leap when you make it.
I should contrast that with working on Iron Fist, because the show is supposed to be in the same universe as really gritty Marvel, like Daredevil and Jessica Jones, which are just really as hard. You can buy a bulletproof person with Luke Cage, that's fine. But the idea of, this one of those characters punched an immortal dragon in the heart and now has glowing hands of power. Like, how are you going to ground that in reality enough that you only get one gimme, science gimme, and go with, how can you even do that? So sometimes it's a pretty tall order. I'd just like to add that to try to even ground it even that much.
Well, interestingly enough, Jess, your question moves us into the next one, which is, tell us some instances of when you were involved in the making of making science less accurate for the sake of story.
I gave them a lot of science that was plausible-ish. There were definitely stretches in there. I'm like, okay, you've got these, ions, the electrolytes in your body. Sodium is highly combustible. There is a thing where people sweat an excessive amount. Maybe he could, through his chi, move the sodium to his hands, and the sweat would ignite it, and then it would glow. You could buy something in there, but they ended up just, he punched a dragon in the heart, and that's it. They don't have to take our suggestions.
The hands are the color of sodium, glowing sodium. They're yellow, right?
Yeah,
here's your sodium.
I'm hoping I'm not going to get either of us in trouble for it, but sometimes, working with my husband being in effects and special effects, he's working on post-production, whereas my consultations and stuff are on pre-production sometimes. And we both were working on Iron Fist. He was trying to design the look of the hands glowing, and we were so NDA'd that we weren't allowed to tell each other that we had worked on it. And finally, I got permission to talk to my spouse and say, look, yellow is the way from the comics, and it also would work because this is some of the science I gave them. And so it kind of crossed over from pre-production to post-production there. But yeah, the perils of working in Hollywood where you can't talk to your spouse, even if you're working on the exact same project.
Anyone else?
I've got a story, and you know, we've done a lot of panels, most of us before, and so I'll tell the story for Lisa's benefit and our audience, because the rest of you have heard this several times before. But on Gravity, when I first met with the Cuarons, this is both Alfonso and Jonas who co-wrote the screenplay. We met in Chateau Marmont in the lobby. It's a famous Hollywood on Sunset, and met for 3 hours, and we had a lot of discussions. And one of the things, you know, they told me the story, the premise, and that we are going to start at the Hubble Space Telescope and work our way down to ISS. And during the span of the conversation, I told them that you realize that the distance between these two orbits, the closest they ever come, the absolute, this will never happen in the real world closest, is about the distance from here to the border with Mexico. That's a close, you're never going to get there on one backpack of propellant and oxygen. So what I recommended was, here's an idea. We know that the space shuttle will not be flying by the time, you know, this movie airs. So it's a reasonable design consideration, excuse me, that the next generation space telescope would be in an orbit that's easily serviceable from the space station. So why don't we create a new fictitious space telescope? Why don't we create the Cannon Space Telescope, named for the astronomer Annie Cannon, to thematically link with our main character, Dr. Stone? And then, you know, we have a more plausible situation, and we can hit up Canon cameras for product placement dollars.
Yeah.
And Mr. Crone said, Mr. Collin, you should have been a producer. But the point he made was they were inspired in part to do this film by the IMAX movie of the Hubble servicing mission. They wanted to recreate the grandeur of space, the grandeur that they felt from that film. And they, knowing the inaccuracies, decided to keep that anyway. So it wasn't like we didn't know the inaccuracies. It wasn't like, you know, we got nitpicked on that. But it you know, and for those who do orbit dynamics, it's a big deal, because you can't even get to one orbit from the other in a shuttle, let alone, you know, just one backpack. But still, if they wanted to keep the two orbits together, and fine, you know, in the real situation of that, if you had the, you know, objects in both orbits, what you get is basically them dying in space. What you have, your movie, without something plausible to get to, what your movie becomes is open water in space, where wetsuits become spacesuits and circling sharks become orbit debris. So, and, you know, 7 Oscars and $724 million later, I guess you could.
I guess they were wrong.
Anyone else? Well, then we will move on.
I think the biggest, no, I was just going to say, I think like that what Kevin is saying about distance and time, it's like, look, to me, when we talk about those things, it's the number one thing that goes first, right? It's like, how fast are things actually moving? How close are they? Because for the most part, like it's abstract even for people who understand it, right? The human brain isn't designed to grasp, you know, that scale. And the audience isn't really primed to grasp that scale. It's like you're just kind of waiting for a very long time. It's a little like in an episode of 24, right? We're expected to believe that Jack Bauer can get down the 405 at rush hour in less than an hour episode. I mean, come on, it's the same problem. I mean, but those are the kinds of compromises I think that we have to make a lot, just, and not just for the sake of drama, just because, and it's not because the audience is dumb, it's just that we're trying to help them understand another idea. And if that you know, the details of the science get in the way of understanding the other idea, then we're doing it wrong.
And to be fair, scientists hate how slow science happens. Like, people tell you sometimes that what they don't tell you about a PhD is how like tedious it can be. And I remember vividly when I was in college, and when the graduate students was just sculling back pints in the pub, and there was a big. I remember saying, "Oh, how did he had a big breakthrough?" He had just managed to get the atmosphere consistent inside his. He was building an electron microscope, or actually an atomic force microscope. He had just managed to get like a stable, pure atmosphere inside that little box for the first time in 6 months. So now he could begin his experiments. If you had given him the choice of a fast forward button, he would have smashed that thing down. So science is really slow, and even scientists, you wish it wasn't that way. So maybe it's a little bit of jealousy in there. Like, I have to sit in the lab for 6 months. Why do you get to just go fast?
How does the genre affect viewer expectation about science accuracy? Might the same mistake in Thor or The Force Awakens pass by relatively unnoticed, but get lambasted if it appeared in, say, The Martian?
Yeah, I think it comes down to consistency in the world. That again, if you set up, certain rules in Thor, they're going to be different than the rules of The Martian. And so I think that once you once you buy into this universe works this way, then I think you can get away with it. You just have different expectations. If Matt Damon had suddenly whipped out, the hammer in Martian, that would have taken me out of the movie. But obviously I had different expectations going into Thor.
Well, it's funny because Thor had its own set of challenges, right? And its own set of expectations are very different from The Martian, right? The Martian is trying to tell a very hard science fiction story. Like, I mean, we're going to science the shit out of this. I mean, Thor could have said, we're going to science the shit out of this. But I don't know if that would have been as interesting a film, even though on some level, I guess he was trying to science the shit out of it. But, the idea with that movie was we needed to make Thor feel like he could exist in a world that had been defined by Iron Man, right? Like, we had to find ways to go, no, it's not that they're magical, it's that they're aliens. It's that it's an advanced technology. How does Mjolnir work? Very well, thank you. We went to a lot of lengths, to try to justify things like, the Bifrost, which is actually pronounced beef roast. Fun fact. There's something where you kind of make a compromise in science. So there was all of that sort of stuff that we had to get past. But really, the thing that we were up against, wasn't, hey, everybody expects a scientifically accurate, depiction of Einstein-Rosen bridges. It was, does it feel like this works with Iron Man? Versus like, hey, Matt Damon is stuck on Mars. And now, of course, it's just like, fuck it, we're going to punch an immortal dragon in the heart, or, chaos magic. It's like, I guess maybe we were working too hard, but,
Mm-hmm. No,
go ahead, Stephen.
No, I think they're different genres. It's like, if you look at Under the Skin, which is a beautiful movie, a science fiction movie. It doesn't, you don't expect to have any details. You don't really know how any of this stuff works. You just take it as this strange alien creature who's moving through her mission. Or another great example is Solaris. You don't really the whole point of it is that you don't get all these details, like these kind of especially in the 1970s, they made a lot of these really kind of weird movies where it's really about mood and theme and the human condition and so on. And I do sometimes think we do go too far into everything must sustain incredible investigation later on and dissection. I think some movies work and they escape that sort of that attempt of free logic and people dismantling by just being so out of the box from the beginning. I say Under the Skin is kind of a good example, that they just escape the whole thing and they managed to get away with just telling their story, and you don't worry about any of it.
Just by labeling the genre, you set expectations. As a science advisor, I get asked all the time, how can you handle Star Wars? Because it's there's no science in that. Right, there's no science, it's fantasy. So my expectations are, do you stick to the rules of your own universe? I don't care if a lightsaber works or not. In that universe, it does, and they're cool. And the lightsaber battles are great, and I love them. So I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I'm a big Harry Potter fan. I can handle the magic because that's the rules of that universe. And it's just, so as long as you go in with, some expectations of that are managed from the onset, and the the production doesn't violate them, I'm good. So it's so like we don't have, you know, the mix of Thor, you know, Mjolnir, you know, being dug up on Mars by Matt Damon. So, you know, there's as cool as that would be.
Thor knew that he put the hammer somewhere. Where did it go? It's like, oh shit, Damon.
Steve, you mentioned Solaris. We're actually using Solaris. I'm using Solaris as an example in the third Hollywood science book. So, and it's about nebulosity and expectations. So there's a scene with him and Jeremy Davies where he simply won't accept there are no answers for you on Solaris. And that part is actually really useful for our discussion on different types of intelligence. So just FYI, so Solaris is really useful, and it's so cool how perfect that scene is. Anyway, I digress. Go ahead, Jenna. We're going next.
So dystopian sci-fi is very popular, but that is the thing that's going to inspire people to build better futures? If you look at the shows that people cite as getting them into science or engineering, they often, more than not, say something like Star Trek or Bionic Woman. Do we need more optimistic sci-fi shows?
I think that's one reason that Star Trek has stuck around as long as it has and as many iterations as it has, is because it is inherently an optimistic show. And I do think that we need that.
You know, I do like dark dystopian science fiction, but I believe that the pendulum has kind of swung too far to one side, where everything has to be dark these days and depressing. And if you walk through the halls of JPL or Marshall or Goddard or any of the NASA centers, what you see is a never-ending stream of action figures and posters and the things from Star Trek, and it's often just Star Trek, but a few other things that got people inspired, and you don't do that with dark dystopian science fiction. So the shows like Star Trek, and I count myself among this, created a lot of scientists, and I think we need more shows like that to create the next generation, or even Eureka. Hopefully we will have created the next generation scientists in our show. So yeah, I think there's certainly room for more positive science fiction that people will embrace. I'm a big fan. As even though it's gotten darker, I love Discovery. I know people online can't wait to bash it, but they can't wait to bash anything. So I'll just say up front, I love Discovery.
At my very first Comic-Con, I was attending a science of science fiction panel, and a lot of people were talking about how they were scientists, and it was sci-fi that had gotten them into their fields. But then somebody raised their hand who was a roboticist, I think, and said, can you science writers on the panel lay off the dystopian robots take over the world, because it's getting really hard to get funding from Congress, because everybody thinks, like, nobody wants to fund AI or robotics because they're all afraid of. I wonder what things like Black Mirror is really cool, but it not only holds a mirror up to, you know, us and our social media, you know, behaviors and things, but there's some scary technology in there, and I wonder what that's done to funding. So once you are a scientist, the science.
There's a little bit of a delay here. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't mean to keep stepping on your story, but what that guy said about the funding. Jane Espenson, if that's a panel that I was on, Jane Espenson then says, you know, I'm sorry, killer robots are just a lot more interesting. And Phil Plait then says, you know, Skynet's hiring.
Yeah. I mean, look, one of the problems that we're up against is that, you know, there's no fiction without a problem to solve, right? And this stuff is great, but if you're going to go to the trouble of dramatizing it, they need to dramatize it in a way that it presents conflict, right? The thing that's great about something like Star Trek is it doesn't have to be, you know, here on Earth with us, right? It can be out there. It can be some other bunch of a-holes. And here, everything can be perfectly great, right? And that's fine. That's where it gets really hard. And I think that I'm going to question the premise of this part of the discussion a little bit, and say that I don't know that it's necessarily a choice between dark dystopian science fiction and optimistic science fiction. I mean, you're not wrong to characterize it that way, because I think very often that's the way that it goes. but I do think there's room for a middle ground, where we're telling stories about science, where shit happens that can be scary, but that it doesn't have to be bleak, right? I think the best stories about scientists are ones where, regardless of the problem, the scientist is somebody that we can get behind, smart, resourceful. She's up against something that challenges the limits of her capabilities, right? It's okay, if it's something as scary as a killer robot, right? As long as like the message of the movie or the show is not, oh, by the way, it's hopeless, right? That's the great thing about something like T2. It's, look, that the premise of that is not on August 18th, like 1997, Skynet became self-aware and bought the world a Coke and a smile. I mean, that's not the movie. But it does end, T2 ends on this note of hope, right? Where the original Terminator doesn't. Like, it's difficult to imagine like that movie ending on a more hopeful note, right? That's the whole point, right? That like if a Terminator like could learn to value human life, maybe we can too, right? I mean, that to me isn't about dystopia. That's a very optimistic movie, but it's also dark. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not Star Trek. It's not vanilla. It's not the edges haven't been sanded off of it. End rant mode.
Do you think that the Hollywood portrayal of science undermines science in reality? For example, TV doctors make cures in the last 10 minutes of an hour-long drama, while in real life it can take years for a cure or never even happen.
Well, one thing we learned in the last year is sometimes it actually is lupus, Dr. House. But
well, that makes me think of the so-called CSI effect, in which apparently juries have been trained, by watching CSI. Juries now expect that some scientist is going to come in and do the exact thing that's going to, pin down the bad guy. And if there isn't, DNA analysis and, fingerprint analysis backing it up, that they don't believe the argument unless it has been CSI'd.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And interesting, I think in defense attorneys have claimed, because of the CSI effect, everybody believes forensic evidence when it does appear absolutely, completely. Like it's very hard to argue that maybe the local state lab isn't the best lab in the universe, or these results are rest. I think it's very confounding. Like exactly like what are some of these effects? I think that the only genuinely true, absolute known CSI effect is that applications to forensic schools went up as a result of CSI. But I don't think like shows are damaging science literacy. I know this sometimes is a little bit of pearl clutching. Oh my God, what if we tell people that some astronomical thing was smaller than it was, or things went faster? But science shows are, again, to some of the points we've raised, they're not saying ignore climate change. They're not saying vaccines are going to give your children autism. They're not saying or don't wear masks. They're not saying the big challenge that we have about science in the world. Science fiction shows are not causing those problems, and I think science fiction shows are giving a lot of literacy. Like health shows have historically over decades been the mechanism in which a lot of very nuanced human instruction has been given, right back to should you be an organ donor, what's this weird thing called AIDS, what's that all about, child abuse, all the way through. If you look through all those shows, they were showing on these dramatists, and they're playing that in very human ways, which often was a much more nuanced way of talking about these issues than government PSA announcements or brochures at your doctor's office and so on, because they would often like really get into an idea. So I don't think anybody should be worried about is science fiction rotting our proto scientists' brains. I don't think that's an issue.
During that conversation, what came up was the notion of rates, the rates at which things occur, and solving problems very rapidly and easily. And one of the things we emphasize in the Hollywood science books is that one of the top perhaps the top inaccuracy in science inaccuracy in TV and film is the rate at which things occur. And Jane Espenson, the famous, well-known writer, she once said in the entry to one of my books that your dramatic tension may dissipate somewhat during that realistically long wait while you sequence DNA. Mm-hmm. So just so the things are speeded up because you're trying to tell a story, and it's all about the story and not about the wait. We had some rate issues in Gravity. There's always rate issues, and to turn that on its head in The Big Bang Theory, they actually, and I'm sure the science advisor had some say in this with this thought in mind, is that they had an episode where Howard, having been to ISS, was asked to throw out a pitch at the first Los Angeles Angels game, or at an Angels game. And they told the crowd, hey, we have an ISS astronaut here, Dr. Wolowitz, yay. Or actually, no, it's not a Dr. Wolowitz, it's Mr. Wolowitz, yay. And he's brought the Mars rover that's going to deliver the ball, yay. And then they hand the ball to the rover and it begins to creep to home plate at the realistic rate of about an inch a second, which would put it at home plate in about 12 minutes. And people's excitement dissipates pretty quickly. And that's what happens to your story when you don't enhance the rates a little bit. So that kind of inaccuracy, it's the first thing that people complain about, but it's also the last thing you want to change.
So how have audience expectations about scientific content of entertainment changed over the years? Has the task of meeting those expectations gotten harder or easier, and why?
I think the expectations have gotten more realistic. I think, and to some degree, I credit the fact that science in science fiction is popular. I credit the Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is an organization that provides scientists as consultants for productions. And it's kind of akin to slipping some vegetables into a toddler's meal. You try to get them to eat a little bit of the facts along with their entertainment. And I think that there's an appetite for it, and people are kind of getting better at it, and they're kind of expecting more of it. So I think it's helping. It doesn't help with the online discourse afterwards, because where there was trolling before, there's probably even more trolling now about, well, this wouldn't be right and this wouldn't be right. But the fact is that whenever I see people talking about the science of anything I've consulted on, I'm happy, even if they're complaining about it. I mean, somebody is out there having a conversation about whether this drug can be absorbed orally. I get a lot of pharmacology questions, whether this drug can be absorbed orally or whether this drug would have this effect. And they're talking about a good win.
It's a mixed bag. It's easier to push into more advanced science than perhaps you would have in the past, because there's some basic science everybody should know. There's some intermediate science that most people know, and then there's some really speculative things, and that's where you can do a lot of drama and actually a lot of gray areas where you can search for drama. And I think you can start to push the envelope a little further with the expectation that people kind of know most of the basics. Something Steve wrote for our first Hollyweird science book, sorry, Stephen, I apologize, is that people today have a better understanding of the surface of Mars than the best scientists did in 1963. Stephen, you want to elaborate? I stole your thunder a little bit, but
just if you think about what your utter couch potato, when saying the science fiction has taught somebody who is maybe utterly incurious about the world, but you were to ask them, what does the surface of Mars look like? They would say a red desert, and you have to wear a spacesuit, and there's no water and all the rest of it. And there's no trees or vegetation and so on. And there's craters. That is a more accurate picture, as I say, than NASA. If you look at NASA's what we think that Mars is going to look like, and they've got little vegetation moving around because they really thought there might be vegetation before they actually sent probes out there. Those best guesses were actually not so great. I mean, they weren't terrible, but they were pretty wrong. So even that person who is so incurious that has inherited something of the heritage of this, sort of space-going civilization that we have, enough to know that better what their next door neighbor looks like than perhaps any human being in the history of the species if you look at it proportionally. And I think that's kind of wonderful and amazing.
You know, and as far as getting it right, you know, we're in an environment now where you're going to get nitpicked. That's always happened. That's one of the reasons why they have science fiction conventions. It's part of Nerd Fellowship is bitching about your favorite show. But at the same time, you have much more. It's much more efficient. You're now doing it at gigabits per second rates, and so it's a lot more extreme than it used to be. So you're going to get complaints, and you're going to get the same people who were constitutional scholars during the impeachment, who then became immunologists during the beginning of COVID, are now both screenwriting and science experts when your show's on, and they're going to complain. So there's always that people, and if you don't see their way, you get called a sheeple. But so there's more complaining and there's more attempted disinformation. But the cool thing about it is whether your science is right or wrong, whether or not you've got some inaccuracies in your episode, what it does is if you're a science advisor, and there are a lot more science advisors today on TV and film because of the exchange, you will have access and you will have opportunities to explain the science that you wouldn't have had previously, either in Comic-Con panel discussions, DVD extras, writing Hollyweird science. So whether or not it's easier to depict the science in TV and film, it's easier to get it out there, even if it's fundamentally a little bit wrong or fundamentally wrong in your production.
So I know you guys have talked about this a little bit, but how frustrating is it for you when you work on a creative project and you do your best to get the scientific details right, and the work is still criticized publicly for not having gotten the details right?
Evan.
That's actually evolved over time. At first, I got pretty upset. Early on in Battlestar Galactica, like the second episode, somebody in some channel online complained pretty loudly and pretty mean about some of the science. And they were wrong, by the way, but they were really kind of brutal. Was a science advisor asleep at the wheel, blah, blah, blah. And for some reason, this really got to me. And I got on the phone, I called Richard Hatch, because we were pretty good buddies, and I complained. And rather than his usual genial, approachable, nurturing self that he's come to be known for, he was uncharacteristically candid. And what he told me was, well, you've made it. You're on a big time TV show. Now you have to grow a thick skin, because there's some people out there, they can't create things on their own. So they just have to bash what you do. So you can either learn to live with it or get out. And that sort of candor was what I needed at the time. So now, I care a little bit, because you want to do a good job. You want the science to be as right as possible, especially if it doesn't affect the show, especially if you can get it right and not change the story. You want it to be right as much as possible. But as far as the complaints online, I don't complain. Doesn't bother me much anymore. Even when they come from Ph.D. astronomers.
Yeah, I was going to say. I'm constantly like, we're writing a book together. Please don't get in another flame war with Neil deGrasse Tyson, please.
Yeah, there was that time that I got a call from a VP at Warner saying, so Neil deGrasse Tyson saw an early version of our movie and he's tweeting out some of his misgivings. You want to take care of that? Sure. Anyway, I go ahead. Anybody else?
I mean, look, man, I've been there. Like, but it kind of cuts both ways, right? So when we started doing, good Lord, 20 freaking years ago on Andromeda, one of the things we were trying to do was, how do we do everything differently from Star Trek, right? How do we get away from, beam weapons, which don't work? And how do we use kinetic energy, with those kind of missile bodies at the right distances, and kind of how do we make all that stuff work? How does it feel more like a submarine movie? On one hand, you have, the kind of the armchair experts who are like, well, why don't you have shields? And this is this blah, blah. They think the goddamn science fiction is real, right? On the other hand, though, every so often something happens that restores your faith in humanity and the basic brains of people. The very first thing that I ever had produced, I sat and I did spreadsheets, man. I figured out the time that it would take, like where things would be in space, how fast are they moving, when they're firing, like when does it intersect, like all of this shit was worked out, right? And you know, you kind of put it out there, and it's like we were saying, it's like you get people who are like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, and this isn't this, or this isn't that. But then somebody comes along, a fan, who backs out all of your numbers and then goes, oh, wow, that really worked. I'm like, oh, thank you. Thank you. It's like, you know, guys, I did a little bit of analysis, and that was back in the days when the internet didn't completely suck. But still, it happens, right? Sometimes they go, wow, somebody notices, like, to a fine degree of detail, and that makes it all worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm
Got
with
it.
Jess
By the way,
on
I know
this
you
one,
guys-
that as long as it gets people talking about the science, whether they're picking it apart or, you know, congratulating it, I think as long as it's kind of getting into people's consciousness, I take that as a good thing.
I got the best headline ever after Iron Fist, because I designed they needed a drug that the drug kingpin, Madame Gao, could be bringing in, but it had to be close to heroin, but different enough that it would really, you know, be the hot thing for addicts to use. And they needed some new delivery method and everything. And they used everything I gave them almost verbatim. And the series got mixed reviews. I loved it, but the series got mixed reviews. But one newspaper clipping I saved said, you know, Iron Fist to so-so reviews, but the science is frighteningly accurate. And I went, yes! Frightening, but it's accurate.
Right. You know, if I could turn that on its head a little bit, let's reverse that. You know, just like genre sets your expectations, so does what's going on screen. When I first got the script for Exodus Part 2, it was Part 4 or fourth episode of Battlestar Galactica's third season. There's that part where Galactica does what they call the Adama maneuver, or the belly flop, when it literally plummets through the atmosphere of New Caprica. And what I said was in my notes was, there's nothing about this works. Galactica would break up. I don't care what it's made of. Since we're going to real science, no really weird materials, it would break up. You know, it would break up. When the Vipers tried to launch, you would slam into that plasma sheath and they would just get shattered. There, you know, I went all the details. It would tumble. There's no amount of thrusters that's going to keep it from tumbling. I went all the details. And then I finished with, but owing to the extreme coolness of this, go for it, because I want to see that. And do you know how many complaints we got online? Zero.
Yeah.
It was one of the worst science moments we had, but it was cool. And so people gave it a pass because it was cool.
And it felt like it was obeying rules, right? It felt like things were happening in that moment. It didn't feel free. And I think that's the key, right? Is that when we break the rules so brazenly, as long as it doesn't feel like we're doing it for convenience sake, in the sense that we're getting away with something, right? It's like, it felt risky. It felt dangerous. It felt like the Galactica was getting damaged. It felt like those pilots were taking risks. Like the drama was all there. So as much as I think it would have been hilarious if that episode had ended with like, hey, look, here comes the Galactica to save us. No. No. I think it worked out okay.
And then episode 305 is Battlestar Pegasus, right?
Episode 305 is just blank screen. It's a test pattern.
No, that'd be a great episode of Robot Chicken, actually, if they did that. Just
yeah.
I'm not sure it wasn't.
Oh.
So we have about 5 minutes left. What's the one thing you wish audiences and your fellow creative people or scientists would understand better about what you do?
Oh, I wish they knew that we don't have total control, even if we are asked, and it's not every production that asks for a scientific consultant. When we are there, we offer them the best ideas we have, and they can take it or leave it. We are so low on the food chain, they don't realize. So I have people come to me like, why didn't you tell the director? I'm not going to walk up to the director and tell them what to do. I'm not going to walk up to the writers and tell them what to do. I can give them ideas and suggestions, and they can take it or leave it. And I wish the public knew that.
And I'm going to kind of enhance what Jess said a little bit. I completely agree with that. And also what people don't realize is not only do we not have copy editor like say over the science in an episode of television or a film, they don't realize is how collaborative an episode of television, for example, is, and how many sets of notes the writer gets. They've got studio notes, and they've got executive producer notes, and they got writer's room notes. You're one more set of notes that they have to deal with when they have a deadline. So sometimes they just can't get to it. And so there's many reasons why the science may be inaccurate, and it might not have anything to do with anybody in the process. It's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I wish that people would understand that it's just about the story. That is the first priority in telling movies or film, is telling a good story, and good science is really below that on the priority list.
It's
And
not a dissertation.
Also,
yeah.
No, good Lord, no. And I think people need to understand, look, we're not asking the consultants to give us information or guidance because we don't give a shit what they say. We're asking because we do. Right? It's like we're asking because we are looking for that thing that unlocks the storytelling for us, right? It's like, if I could get Kevin to show me something that explains, like, I'm not going to get into why, but like the 3-body problem, right? And why that's a big deal and what happens in a 3-body problem. You can show me that, then I can turn that into drama. He's about to do it, right? But I can make that work. What I can't do is give you a blow-by-blow description of everything, right? It's like, I'm asking because I care about what it means, not because what the details are. And that if the details are wrong, it's not his fault.
And I think finally, people should remember that, in all of this, again, you've got to get the science. Scientists make shortcuts to explain things all the time. They make approximations. Like if you go into a science museum and you see a model of the solar system, unless it's one of these huge ones that take place over city blocks, like on the mall in DC, there's going to be a lot of, it's not going to be to scale. There's going to be all kinds of inaccuracies in that. The kind of the very simple model of the atom that you're taught, that allows you to understand the periodic table, allows you to do basic chemistry, has very little to do with the sort of the quantum mechanical shells of probability spheres and so on. That is actually what's going on. And fundamentally, science itself is not fully consistent yet. Our two most complete theories of science, general relativity and quantum theory, just do not fit together. There is a fundamental inconsistency in our current model of science. Yet science works. We make it go, and everything is okay. And so when you spot an inconsistency in a movie, it's okay. Just enjoy the movie.
Okay, so we have to wrap, but before we go, I guess in the same order we started, let us know what you're doing now and where we can find you online.
You can find me online at Stephen Cass. That's at STEEPHENCASS. And I am doing mostly for my day job, science and technology reporting. So go and read some.
You can find me at Kevin Grazier on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and ResearchGate for other social media sites. Currently, I'm just doing a lot of writing. I'm working on the 3rd Hollyweird science book. I am working on a feature film screenplay. And right now, I'm also advising on a film, a science fiction film called Persephone.
I can be found at www.jesscail.com. I am trying to keep up with Kevin as his co-author and his co-authors, the rats that he keeps care of. And I'm not consulting on any projects right now, but you never know when that's going to happen.
I can't remember if it was Lisa or me.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Okay. You can find me on Twitter at AshMaster0. That's AshMaster0. And I am currently up to my ash and producing the 2nd season of Dota Dragon's Blood, which will hopefully be out God knows only when. I mean, Netflix. Only Netflix can know the day or the hour.
And you can find me on Facebook or on Twitter at LK Klink. And I'm currently working on a screenplay that has nothing to do with science whatsoever.
Are you happy about that?
It's kind of a nice change of pace,
Yeah.
actually.
And you can find me at Jenna Busch, Busch, like the beer, not the president. I am also at jennabusch.net. And you can hopefully in the near future pick up my book on running. And thank you guys so much for joining the panel.
Thank you.
Jenna.
Thank you.
Thank you.